the morning. Dan Proft here, the Chicago Tribune editorial on the Tuesday primary election. It reads in part this: the vacuum created by the absence of a functional Republican electoral apparatus has been filled by consultants and operatives who continue to profit from losing campaigns. A small circle of donors and strategists, including conservative radio talk show host and political consultant Dan Proft, has repeatedly produced the same results: expensive statewide bids that go nowhere. One close observer put it bluntly to us, describing Proft as, quote, Pritzker's most effective political operative, unquote, despite being paid by Republicans. Proft reportedly hauled in $25,000 a month from the Dabrowski campaign, only to serve up a rematch between Pritzker and Bailey. Democrats dominate Chicago and the inner suburbs. Republicans do the same, but have largely maxed out their gains there. The path to relevance in Illinois runs through outer suburbs and exurbs. Any progress is sure to be incremental, requiring seat gains, stronger candidates, and a rebuilt coalition, not a sudden statewide revolution. Oh, a victory runs through the suburbs? It sounds like something I've been saying for, 24 years, since we started to see our numbers atrophy in the suburbs when Jim Ryan lost to Rod Blagojevich in 2002. And continued on in 2006 with Topinka, and continued on in 2010 when Brady lost to Quinn. And then we had that interregnum with Bruce Rauner. And then Bruce Rauner imploded. And then he lost by a historical margin for a Republican in 2018. I wasn't on that team. We tried to remedy his betrayals by nominating Jeannie Ives in that primary in 2018, you'll recall. But okay, that's my fault too. And then 2022, they said the same thing about my super PAC, the super PAC I ran, I should say, not mine, the super PAC I ran that supported Bailey and was really responsible for his blowout primary victory. And then, of course, we were not coordinated, so I ran my messaging, and he ran his messaging because I was an independent expenditure PAC. And then, of course, he performed poorly and lost decisively to Pritzker. And so this time around, we had Ted Dabrowski from the suburbs, which the Tribune editorial board argues we need to reconstitute ourselves in the suburbs. So you had an intelligent policy wonk, not somebody that's repeating the talking points they hear on Fox News, which is what the Tribune editorial board accuses the Republican Party of being. We had the exact kind of candidate that they say we need, but he's up against $60 million in residual name ID from the effort we put forward on behalf of Bailey in 2022, and Bailey's run in 2024 against Mike Bost in Southern Illinois, which, you know, even though he lost again, produced more supporters in that part of the state. Against a first-time candidate, we put together $1.7 million. That's not a lot of money. Doesn't go very far against the kind of lead that Bailey started with in that race, which everybody knew, which is why Bailey didn't participate in the debates and ran a Rose Garden strategy. He knew he starts way ahead, and you were going to have to generate significant resources to catch him. And how did Heidner and Mendrick do on that score, in addition to pulling 100,000 suburban votes between the two of them? So we're splitting up the Chicago metro vote against Bailey's base in Southern Illinois and residual name ID. But, I mean, I get it. The Chicago Tribune editorial board, very concerned about the Republican Party's future because it's full of conservative reformers. And they have great insight into what the Republican Party should do, obviously, and concern for the Republican Party. I'm moved by it. So, I mean, I want to learn, too, just like anybody else. I'm open-minded. So let's find out how we win. Chris Jones, editorial page editor and chief theater critic for the Chicago Tribune, Broadway critic for the New York Daily News, and author of Rise Up, Broadway and American Society from Angels in America to Hamilton. Chris Jones, thanks for joining us.
It's my pleasure. Good morning.
So tell me how we win. Besides getting me out of it, I know.
Well, I think let's start out by saying that our concern here was motivated by a desire for the Republican Party in Illinois to be stronger because it's not providing voters with a choice at this present moment. That we have as you probably know, the headline on that particular editorial was the Republicans are essentially disappearing, and that I do think, in all fairness, we should acknowledge that was our main concern, was to try and say voters need a stronger Republican Party in Illinois. And a lot of that came, I think, from the lack of candidates in gerrymandered races, which I know you know all about. But I think that was also what we were trying to say, is that in race after race after race, primary voters just didn't come. And they really had no good choices on the ballot because donors knew that in most of those races there was not going to be a chance in hell to win. And so I think that's what we were motivated by when we wrote that editorial, if that makes sense.
How many Republicans are on the editorial board at the Tribune?
Well, I wouldn't, we like to not disclose any particular affiliation like that, but I think it's fair to say that...
Zero?
No, not zero. Absolutely not. No,
Name one.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Not doing that. But nonetheless, there's a lot of interest in the Republican Party, and genuine interest and a genuine desire in wanting the Republican Party to be functional in Illinois, so the voters have a better choice.
But you didn't endorse in the governor's race. Why?
Well, we have a board of directors that didn't permit us to do that. So we're owned by a board of directors that decided that all the papers that they own should not endorse in two races. One was governor and one was senator. So what I did was I tried to marshal our resources so that we could talk about those races. And I think it was pretty clear. We spoke to Ted. We spoke to Darren Bailey. They met with us, and we had our opinions on that. And, it struck us that Bailey was a bit of a change guy, probably as a consequence of what has happened in his family. And he had a better message this time, we thought. And we reflected that in what we wrote. And, I mean, is your view that that's not the case, that it's from what you said at the beginning, it sounded like you think it's the same old Darren Bailey, right?
Yeah, as a candidate. And by the way, I'm sure the editorial board knows this because they're such keen observers, but I supported Darren Bailey because you were talking about legislative races too. So just a point of order on this, getting lectured by the Chicago Tribune editorial board about infrastructure and state legislative races. And then, the cheap shots, I made $25,000 a month as a consultant to the campaign, right? You have to get those shots in because you're so venal and ignorant, frankly. There's no understanding that I raised twice as much as I took in compensation and did all the work of a general consultant, the kind of things general consultants don't do. But that's irrelevant. I understand. Also, I ran an independent extra PAC that supported state legislative candidates going back to 2012, trying to get better Republican candidates out of primaries and hold races at that time and then win back races in the suburbs. We put tens of millions of dollars into that effort with some success, including Darren Bailey, who I backed the first time he ran for state representative against an incumbent who had voted for Ronner's tax increases. So I know Darren Bailey very well, particularly in experience in a way that nobody on your editorial board knows, particularly from last cycle. And so we made an assessment. And then so I was criticized back then by some of the same people for backing Darren Bailey, and now I'm criticized for not backing him despite performance. And you're all about sort of performance metrics because we got to win. And then you do the Tony McCumbee thing, the legislative leader who you guys really like. Of course you do, a surrender Republican who supported the Amendment 1 to codify the public sector unions as the bosses of this state. That's real good conservative reform. And in 2024, she picked up exactly 0 state House races. She's the House Republican leader. That's her responsibility. I have nothing to do with her. I have nothing to do with John Curran. But the fact that they languish in the minorities, as they did under Durkin before her and Radonio before him, But we like her. I mean, it's
we do like her.
Well, no, it's fine. It's fine if you like her, but could you actually apply the same measurements and the same thresholds to people across the board rather than just taking cheap shots and being so intellectually dishonest, which is what this editorial was?
All right, fair enough. Well, you're entitled to your opinion. I understand.
Yeah, thank you. Well, now respond to it.
Well, the point was a good one. The point was a good one that it was a bad election for Republicans. Some of it was functional, some of it was structural. But at the end of the day, we found Ted to be a limited candidate. I mean, that's just what we found. And I would say going into this cycle that we thought that would be somebody who would be the person that we would be more likely to support. And I think after our meeting, we didn't find that. We just didn't find him to be somebody who could solve these problems that you're talking about. And, he's a very nice guy, a very smart guy. I think you're right about that. But there was something missing in that campaign that you looked, in the sense that you looked out at that guy and you didn't necessarily see a future governor. And I think that was something that we were surprised a bit by, and that probably indicates some of the issues that we were talking about.
Okay, but I mean, it's okay, though I disagree. I mean, all this talk about Ted, not having charisma or whether it doesn't look like a governor, whatever, this nonsense by the same people who are pension reform and property tax caps and law and order and all these seemingly intractable problems. And here's a guy who spent the last 15 years investigating, studying, reporting on, detailing, advocating for sensible, common sense, conservative reform policy solutions, distinguishing himself certainly from the political power structure that exists, being way ahead of the learning curve with both parties on things like school choice, which Pritzker is opting out of, that would present a real contrast in the general election. So, you talk about competence, and that these are the qualities the Republican Party needs to exhibit. And then we elevate or try to elevate a candidate whose calling card is competence, not charisma. And it's, he's not gubernatorial enough. I mean, it's really something to behold, the logic there.
I don't think he was, man. I don't think he was. It's not to say he couldn't be, but as presented in this cycle, I don't think he was.
And again, the larger commentary on what the Republican Party needs to do and all these bromides about investing in the grassroots and state legislative races and so forth. So who should do that? Is the Chicago Tribune editorial board, because they're so concerned about the Republican Party, are they going to take up that banner?
Well,
because I know you're giving the legislative leaders a pass, so I just want to know who's going to do it.
Who's going to do it within the Republican Party, you're asking me?
Yeah, maybe the Chicago Tribune the editorial board should step in.
Well, we have our views on what the Republican Party should do, and it's all done in the spirit of having a stronger Republican Party in Chicago and in the Chicago suburbs and in Illinois. And that's our job, is to say this is not working, and this is how we think it needs to change. We're obviously not the ones who are going to do it. It's not our job. Our job is to point out the need for a strong Republican Party and what we think is the sort of the pathway to do that. And we were arguing in that editorial, the pathway ran through suburban Chicago. Now, we're moderate.
No kidding.
You're right about that. That's so guilty as charged, right? So we're thinking that the Republicans need to find candidates that suburban voters can be excited by. Yes, the party needs to find candidates with a bit more charisma. I think that's a factor. And I think that if you look at that, you've got to remember that Donald Trump got 44% of the votes in Illinois, and that preference that you saw a couple of years ago was not reflected on Tuesday night. And so that tells you that the voters out there who want to vote Republican and not finding the candidates that it's not necessarily whether they'll support them or not, but they weren't even coming out to the primaries to make their opinions known. I mean, surely you can agree with some of that, right, Dan?
Well, of course. I mean, fatalism is a huge problem. I mentioned it the day after, 560,000 Republican primary voters as compared to 800,000 4 years ago. But the difference is you had people that were actually investing in candidates, not just mine, not just the candidate I backed and not just the investors I had, but obviously Ken Griffin put $50 million behind Richard Irvin, and Gary Rabine spent 7 figures of his own money to run, and Jesse Sullivan had backers too, to the tune of $10 or $12 million. So you have resources, then you generate awareness and you generate interest. You don't have resources because people take the position you took at the outset while wishing for a viable Republican Party, that none of these candidates have a chance in hell, and the donors go away, and it's hard to run campaigns that penetrate people's consciousness in a state this big and this populous with limited resources, which all of the candidates had. So, I mean, Darren Bailey raised 15 cents. So good luck in a general election unless you have those angel funders that you decry when they're aligned with me coming to his rescue, which I don't think they will, because everybody feeds into this fatalism that I'm describing, saying there's no chance in hell, Pritzker's indomitable, Illinois is lost, and so on and so forth. I was attempting, as was Ted, thankfully, it was good of him to try to chart that different path with somebody viable in the suburbs, because victory comes through the suburbs, since we both agree on that. And in response to that, we get the I get the cheap shots and Ted gets the, you weren't charismatic enough. I mean, the punditry is almost as dismal as the power structure in the state, I got to say. But okay, you guys got your say, I got my say. I appreciate you coming on and going tit for tat with me, as always. I do appreciate that. Chris Jones is the... Go ahead, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I'll say one last thing. What struck us when we were writing that editorial was, I think it was Margaret Croak in the race for controller, got more raw votes than all of the Republicans in the primaries put together. And I think we looked at that and we went, well, that clearly means that the Republicans have got to change what they're doing to some degree.
No kidding. I've been arguing that and efforting it since, I don't know, about 1996. But, okay.
Fair enough.
I'm the fall guy. I can take it. I can take the weight. No problem. Chris Jones, editorial page editor and chief theater critic for the Tribune, Broadway critic for the New York Daily News. And let me promote your book. And author of Rise Up Broadway and American Society, From Angels in America to Hamilton. Chris Jones, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Dan.
And he joins us in Chicago's Morning Answer.
Before you see it on TV, share it on Facebook, or read about it in the paper, hear it here first. This is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer. Take the journey of living a happy, successful, and meaningful life through God. Listen to It's Time with Dan Lights, Sunday mornings at 9 on our sister station, AM 1160. Hope for your life.
Sean Thompson here, and I'm with